Greetings and how are you? This is Coach Fleischer and this is Kinesiology 214. In this lecture, we'll be going over general adaptation syndrome. Now I understand, and I've understood from other students in previous classes, that general adaptation syndrome is explored in other coursework as part of your coursework for kinesiology. Got it good. For some of you, this will be a refresher. For others, this will be an introduction. Either way, I hope I'm able to impart a little bit more information to you guys, and I hope you learn something new. So when we look at general adaptation syndrome, oftentimes referred to as GAS, G-A-S, it is really the foundation for obtaining results for all training activity. At its core, at its root, what we're after is applying a training stimulus to the human body to get a result. And it presents a real predictable way for the body to adapt to stressors. We know if we apply a certain amount, we get a certain response. We apply a certain type of stressor, we get a certain type of response. And we know if we apply too much of a stressor, we know the response. Now, this theory was originally observed by a gentleman by the name of Hans Selye. It's really kind of morphed into its own, in the world of fitness and training. And the experiments he started with dealt with mice and injecting different hormones, et cetera, and how their bodies responded. And one thing he found was the responses were pretty much all the same. It was the stress that the mice were under in the response to the injections that were causing a stress adaptation. And so he actually went into this a little bit further, and different research has found that, if you zap a single-celled organism, it's going to have an adaptation response. If you zap it too much, it will then eventually stop adapting and die. If you don't zap the little guy enough, it'll only adapt so far. So you have this kind of mechanism where you can zap that little guy, and you can have the frequency of how often you're conducting the electrical impulse, or you can have the intensity of the electrical impulse. And the single-celled organism adapts to it. It's just a matter of which mode you're talking about and which response you're looking to have. And really, at the end of the day, what you're looking at with this is you're looking to have this general adaptation syndrome apply to the single-celled organism and have it actually apply to and have a juxtaposition with the human body. And you'll hear me in this class talk almost like just freely and colloquially about the human body, but I'll refer to it as a human organism. And that's my just in my head how I translate single-celled organism and human organism. Then you have the electrical stimulus and a training stimulus. And it's a pretty easy juxtaposition, right? And the adaptation is seen at the cellular level, and the adaptation is seen on the training or in the from a training stimulus in the human organism. And you look at this and you go, all right, we're applying a training stimuli to the human organism to get a certain response. And it's really evolved over the years to have program design and people who are professionals in developing program design, truly professionals and truly skilled in that area, will train athletes for a certain response. And you look at different individuals, if you have the right combination between good genes, right genetic pool, they're choosing the right sport to be in, and many times that's just self-selected anyways. And then you have the right coach who's able to work with that athlete and provide the right response. Hey, now you have a really good recipe for success. This does hold true for the general population as well as the prehab rehab population, right? Somebody comes in, they've had an injury, they need to rehab themselves. You're applying a stimulus to that individual. Now, it might not be heavy squats or power cleans or doing box jumps. It could be something as simple as trying to stand on one foot after that individual had maybe a knee replacement and a TKA, total knee arthroplasty. A TKA requires the individual to kind of relearn their body in space and relearn the proprioceptive process in their body. So that stimulus could be something as simple as standing on one foot, standing on a foam roller, or even standing on half foam roller as a means to heighten that instability. For individuals who are from a training population, from the general population, people come in, they want to lose weight. Well, it's pretty straightforward. You're applying a training stimulus to get them to have a response where their body becomes more toned and they lose weight. Where it gets kind of cool is when you look at different sports and you have different sport activities. And I'm going to leave this up here and I'm going to talk while you guys read through this. And you can even hit pause and read through it for a second here while I'm rambling on. But when you look at what's going on here with these different sports, tennis, soccer, football, baseball, each sport has different demands for an individual to be successful in that sport. And so as a result, you have to train your tennis players different than your soccer players, than your football players, than your baseball players. Early on in a training program, you can realistically train them all very similar. I'll get to this in one second. But as you get deeper into a sport, you need to have more specificity in training. This little terminology down here. And here's why. When you look at training for sports, and this will be something we'll hit in a couple weeks, but the first thing is you train for athleticism. You train the person to become a better athlete first. Doesn't matter if it's a sport. And there's different tools that you have at your disposal to make that happen. Then you train more specifically for the particular sport. Each sport, tennis, soccer, football, and baseball, have different sport demands. Then you train for the particular position in the sport. Now, tennis is a little bit different, right? But baseball and football, it's pretty easy to see differences in terms of sports. And that's pretty easy to see a difference between a pitcher versus a infielder versus outfielder. In football, you have somebody who's a defensive back versus an offensive lineman. Those are two very different sport demands that are placed on the human body, and therefore you have to train them specifically for their sport and for their sport adaptation that you're trying to elicit. And it's different for a defensive back than an offensive lineman. It's different for a pitcher than it is for an infielder or an outfielder in baseball. So again, with periodization and program design, really what you're looking at is proper programming places the proper amount of stress on the human organism to elicit the desired training response, but also provides adequate time to allow for rest, recuperation, and recovery. These are huge. In terms of the cyclical nature of applying stressors to the body and applying stress and allowing the body to go through these different phases you'll see in general adaptation syndrome, you have to allow for the supercompensation phase, to allow the body to recover, to allow for those training responses to happen. Whether it's these sports or somebody trying to fit into a wedding dress or they're going on vacation in Bermuda, doesn't matter. You still have to properly plan this out and plan in and cycle in different days of recovery and different days for them to recuperate. So when you look at it, usually general adaptation is written as a 3-stage process where it's alarm, resistance, and exhaustion. I tend to throw in homeostasis, and if you link out to the link I provide regarding general adaptation syndrome and Cellier, you'll see that actually they cite homeostasis as part of the process. So you have a single-celled organism or a human organism that is at rest. You apply a stressor to it. In our case, we're talking working out. The body then goes through an alarm stage. Whoa! There's resistance to that change, and if it is too much, it goes through an exhaustion stage. And when you just really look at my little icons here, you have the at rest, the guy gets zapped. If it's too much stress, it's overwhelming. The human organism does not respond as you like. If it's just right, that's great. Now another branch to this would be if it's not enough. If there's not enough of a stressor, and many times it's a mistake made in training, is you can either go too heavy, too much reps, too much intensity, applying too great a stressor to the body, or conversely, too little, not enough, not right. Once you get the Goldilocks concept in place and it's just right, you can literally grab the training response that you want and put that into a training program and get your athletes to respond positively and have it where you plan out your workouts. Think back through in the spotting video. I mentioned spotting and technique and working with athletes starts long before you put weight on a bar. It starts with good, very solid and prudent program design. Knowing you're putting your athletes in a positive rep environment because you've applied the right stressors in the training environment to elicit the training response you want to get them to push around the weights or sprint just like you want them to sprint or do any type of conditioning where you're looking to have. This is key, guys. This is key in terms of having the right training stimulus to have the proper training response to prepare your athletes to have a positive rep environment. Huge, huge, huge. And I put this out here for you so you can have these two link outs, one to Cellier, the other to general adaptation syndrome, if you want to peruse that on Wiki. And keep in mind with stressors, right? Training is a type of stressor you place on the body. There are negative ones too, right? You also have work, family, home, bills, school. I mean, I'm going to ask you to do homework and do assignments here. That's another type of stressor. And your body responds to stressors pretty much the same way, right? Whether it's positive or negative. The key is, and I just had this conversation with a client last week. She was like wiped out. It's like, Adrian, I am just smoked. I got so much going on. She's a teacher. I'm preparing for school. I'm preparing for this. I got my daughter at home. I have these things going on. I'm preparing for her school as well when summer's over. Oh my God, I'm so overwhelmed. And you know what? To put her through a crushing workout was a huge disservice because it would have been yet another stressor heaped on her shoulders. We actually did a lot of prehab rehab, yoga and Pilates type training, as opposed to kind of like blood and guts, we're going to crush you kind of workout, to allow her body to recover a little bit because she was actually pretty overstressed. So, as I hit on this earlier, in her case, she would have had too much stress, and really, she's not going to drop dead, but it would have been too much for her to handle, and she would have had a poor training response to that training session for the day. And so, going back to Cellier, and you look at the different phases here, I'm going to go into this as opposed to just refreshing all this. This we went over several times, just so you know, I'm not trying to gloss over it. I'm just leaving it up there for a second so you can see it, but it's everything we talked about, and it really plays into this. When you go ahead and you pull down like a periodization program and how the body responds, you have before training, very analogous to homeostasis, right? You apply a training response or a training stressor. The human organism ends up having a bit of a negative response as it's trying to adapt to the training stressor that's placed on it. And over time, it does respond and it ends up super compensating for the stressor that's placed upon it. If you continue with the same stressor, you'll see the performance dip and roll off, much like you see in exhaustion over here. Okay, so here you have general adaptation syndrome. Here you have a training response that's seen through periodization. What you have over time is this. If you are very good at programming out your workouts and workouts for your people, you are very aware of this homeostasis phase. The training loads on the front end cause a dip in performance. The body responds positively and then ends up overcompensating. It's at this point where you have to be sharp enough as a practitioner to realize general adaptation syndrome tells you you need to change the training stimulus, however simple it may be, to start this dip, drive, and come back up process again. So it ends up being a series of waves that undulate higher and higher and higher with increased training responses over time. So general adaptation has its place in terms of applying the stimulus. Here, the response you see when working with athletes. Don't let that one slip out of your head. You're trying to apply a training response to a training stimulus to elicit a training response. So for this class, we're talking a lot about strength training, fitness, etc. And we are specifically, spot on talking about here's a training stimulus. We're trying to get a training response. What training stimulus do you need to apply to get a training response? And you start to look at it from that prism. Things change a little bit. Your modalities, your selection of exercise, how you implement your exercises, how many reps, how many times a week, frequency, intensity, and time, all come into play in terms of your program design. And you no longer are a trainer who comes in or a coach who comes in and tells your athletes to lift. You're somebody who knows exactly on Mondays you're doing a periodization program or periodization routine that's taking your people through X amount of reps and sets over a 12-week mesocycle, blah, 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 to get the training response you want at the end. It's about planning ahead. You fail to plan, man, you are planning to fail. And that is key to this whole process. So realize general adaptation syndrome itself lends itself to prudent program design, applying the right stimulus to get the correct training response. Let that one marinate for a while. I'm going to catch you later. I'm going to sign off. Look for some more videos. Have a great one, guys.